Right, so the introductory assignment for our grant theory review is first species counterpoint. This is a kind of counterpoint where you write note against note. For every note in the bass, we need a note in our melody that we're going to write. Remember, the counterpoint is about really solid melodies, each individually very good, combined so that they're also pleasing when heard together. You want independent parts that sound really good together. Because we want independence, we're going to avoid parallel perfect intervals like perfect fifths and perfect octaves. We do like to use thirds and sixths a great deal, so we're going to avoid parallel octave, parallel unison, parallel fifths. So these guys we're going to avoid. Thirds and sixths, these guys, we love them. You can use them any way you like. Parallel motion between these kinds of intervals is not a problem for counterpoint. There's variety in them. You'll always move between major and minor. They'll keep their independence while sounding really rich and good. These have a kind of a hollow sound because of their purity, because they're perfect intervals. That makes them a good ending point. When you've landed on a perfect interval, it doesn't need to resolve anywhere. These are good for their mobility. Because they're imperfect constances, they have a tendency to move, and that's exactly what we want in the middle of a phrase. So we use lots of thirds and sixths when we're in the middle of a phrase, and then we'll reserve these mainly for ending. If we're going to use them, though, contrary motion is the way to go. Contrary motion is great in counterpoint because if they're moving in different directions, as long as they're not like a mirror image of one another, where it's like one is beholding to the other because it's always doing the inversion of the other. If it's not that, the contrary motion will help those two parts be separate from one another and have a life of their own. Okay, so counterpoint is all, first species counterpoint is about two parts to start with, note against note, where we use our intervals very carefully so that the two parts sound good together, but the parts maintain their independence from one another. That's our goal. Okay, so we know how we want to end. We've said it. We want to end with a perfect interval. So I'm going to pick, for ultimate closer, I'm going to pick scale degree 1 up top so that I have a perfect octave at the end. And this is what I normally do. I normally look to the end and say, here's where I want to go. Set the goal and then work backwards a bit and then get there. So, to end on the octave, I'd like to come at the end from an imperfect consonant, a third or a sixth here. I'm going to choose to do a very typical kind of cadence where you do contrary motion into that octave. No matter what you pick, you need stepwise motion into your last note. That's going to be true all the way through our work. Even romantic music, we're still going to have stepwise connection here. Even if it's decorated in some way, that will be the motion that we want. Okay, so if I were to have picked this note, do you see why that would be a problem? Well, then I'm moving in parallel by perfect octaves. I need a stepwise motion. I can't use this one. I'm stuck with this. So erase the D and use the B instead. And we'll do this. So we got the 6 to the octave resolution. Now we've set up where we're going to go. Let's see how we want to start. Feel free to use any note of the tonic triad here. So you can use C, you can use E, you can use G, because we're basically dealing with a tune that's in C major for our bass. Okay, so anything's really fair game here. In old counterpoint rules from like the Renaissance, they would have chosen only something that would provide a perfect consonance here, but we're freeing it up a bit and adapting to a later styles. Okay, so any of those are fair game. We can pick any octave we like. I guess I'll start here and see what that gives us. All right, now we would like to use contrary motion where possible and thirds and sixths where possible. Those are our two favorites. And as long as we're using thirds and sixths, we can move in parallel a whole bunch. Let's see if we could use a third or a sixth right off. Okay, so here, F produces that interval. What if we moved in parallel for a while? Would that be nice? Well, we could, but I see another possibility here. I could go down this way. Let me mention a couple goals that I have for the melody that are going to start guiding me. Because counterpoint has to do with things sounding good together, but also sounding good as individuals, as independent melodies. I want to attend to the shape of this melody. I'd like to create one climax, one high point, and not overdo it, not use it multiple times or it loses its impact. Use it once. I'd also like to avoid hovering in one range the whole time. I don't want to have it like Jaws, you know, I don't want to have a big prolonged trill. That's too dull. So I want variety. I want to move. I want to get new places. I don't want to just sort of hover. I also don't want it to be so disjointed by lots of leaps that I can't hear it as a tune, a singable thing. Now later we're going to create melodies that are more ornate, and they will move through chords. They'll arpeggiate, and that will involve a lot of leaps. But here, we'd like it to be mainly stepwise motion and highly singable. And then when we go and take this first species framework and elaborate on it, then we can get wild and do all sorts of other things. Add lots of leaps to it. So a leap here is great. One other principle I want to mention too. So we mentioned the fact that we want a good shape to this thing. We want, if we can, have one climactic moment. We don't want it to hover like a big prolonged trill, and we don't want it to be so disjointed from leaps that we don't hear it as a singable tune. Those three things. I'd like to add to that one other thing, and that's it's called the law of recovery. I'll write it over here. Basically, it says that the larger the leap, the more likely it is to be followed by stepwise motion in the opposite direction. So if we have a big leap, there is nothing wrong with the leap of a sixth. But then after it, turn the corner. Same thing if we were to go down. Now that's not a big leap, so the pull isn't quite so strong, but still it's satisfying to take the corner, to turn. So if I take a note and I go da, 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 a big leap, I want to come down da, 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 a sixth, followed by a step in the opposite direction. That's the idea of the law of recovery. Okay, so I chose to do a leap. It's not huge, but I'd kind of like to turn the corner. I didn't choose this one, even though this is possible too, because I kind of want to be independent. I definitely want to be independent from this bottom part, and if it's going to take this contour, I'm going to try doing something a little different, see if it works out for me. Now I could go here to do this law of recovery idea. Here's my leap, turn the corner. That'd be nice, but then I end up with this octave. Remember, octaves, I need to think about those a lot and see, now, is that possible? Can I use it? I can't move by parallel motion into it. So, well, that's fine. I went by contrary motion. Here's motion in opposite direction, so it's fine thus far. We'll see if it sounds good, though. We'll want to check on that. All right, so here are a couple possibilities, ways to wind our way through measure 2. Let's see what we might do here now. I wonder how it'd be if we got some elevation already. What if we're way up here? That might be kind of nice, but then I'm having trouble getting. Okay, if I were to leap up high, I'd have trouble turning the corner. Here's what I mean. If I did this, see, if I try and do the law of recovery after it, I end up with a fourth. And remember, the fourth is dissonant. Even though it's perfect, it's distant. So let me scratch that idea. Now I could move down this way You know what, I want to choose that just so I can make a point here. And that is that if I'm going to use an octave mid-phrase, I can't do this anymore if I choose this F, because I'll be moving in parallel. But if I do use this line, it'll be fine. Contrary motion, opposite direction in each voice, going to the octave, that's fine. But what's really satisfying about this is that I'm not emphasizing that octave, which is associated with closure and stability, but I'm moving through it. That's a real benefit here. If I'm going to use an octave mid-phrase, I'd like to de-emphasize it by moving through it and get on to some other intervals around it. So let me pick this line and see how this works. 3, 3, octave, 6. All right, so it's sandwiched between a lot of thirds and sixths. We did start on the fifth. All right, so we've got perfect intervals here and here, perfect fifth. Starting and ending on stability is great, and when we do use it in the middle of the phrase, we're basically moving right on through it, de-emphasizing it by that passing motion. Okay, now I'm kind of getting stuck around G, so if I can, I'm going to try and get some elevation here. Maybe I can go to something up here. So I'm curious as to whether this would sound decent. All right, let's get a little idea of what might happen. Big leap, we'd kind of like to recover, so we could. Now we could do kind of what this is doing, but then the two parts are starting to move in tandem a lot that way. Another possibility here would be doing C, but look at all that. That's what we want to avoid. Okay. So I don't want to do that. Well, I could leap up to a D here. That would make a nice climax. And what if we tried to... What if we did that? Now, I've still got the features that we liked here. I've got another 6 there. Here's a perfect fifth, okay. And then now that's going to get a lot of emphasis because we're leaping to it, but I think it's going to sound fine. We've got contrary motion into that perfect fifth. I mainly like it because it gets us into a fresh register and gets us up where we're going to be for the C and doesn't overuse any particular note. So let's get some stems on here and I'll play it and see what we think. Okay. So here's the bass. Our tune all by itself. Ooh, I do like it. It's got a lot of variety in it. At the beginning it sounds kind of like we're moving around the G, then we go to the F, then we move to a new zone where it's all about circling around the C, and pinning down where we're headed. Okay, let's see how that sounds together. Ooh, I like it very much. So let's call it a day. We did a few things to make sure that we've got good counterpoint. Good counterpoint means the melodies have a nice, pleasing shape, each unto themselves. And when you combine them, they work well together but maintain their independence. They do have quite different profiles. They do different things. It's not like they're in lockstep with one another. So we've got a lot of independence. Part of what makes that happen is that we're careful when we use perfect intervals to approach them by contrary motion. That's what we like, lots of contrary motion. We like thirds and sixths. They are free to move any way they like. And we've got quite a few of those. 3/3, couple sixths, couple more sixths. And notice how frequently they do move in parallel. There's parallel motion here, parallel motion there, and there as well. Not too much of it, because we don't. Again, you can run into too many. If you maybe 5 or so gets to be a little bit much, but lots of thirds and sixths is a good thing. And a lot of time was spent on this one in making sure that the octaves, the fifths, don't sound like they're the ending point. This one does not sound like it's an ending point or a goal, because we move right through it by contrary motion from a third to a sixth. I really wanted to work in one that did this. I didn't hardly even realize it until just now, but we do have a voice exchange, and that's an important term to know. Voice exchange. Basically means that the two parts swap notes. Here we've got E in the bass, G up top. They swap. Now the soprano, the uppermost part, has the E, and the bass has the G. So voice exchanges means they swap notes. That means this octave is a part of that. It's passing motion within that change. The passing motion here fills in the distance from the G to the E. Similarly, the F here fills in the distance between the E and the G. Okay, so this octave is de-emphasized in a way. Now this one's really emphasized, but you know you're not done because you've just leapt to the highest note you've heard so far, and you've got to go further to close it out. So when you use a perfect interval mid-phrase, make sure that it doesn't bring everything to a grinding halt prematurely. That's that. That's our first species counterpoint.